Let us begin by stopping. Let us begin by taking the concept of time, that ticking, demanding, relentless force that governs your life, and setting it down. Imagine holding a clock in your hands. Feel the weight of it. Hear the frantic clicking of the second hand. Now, imagine opening your hands and letting it drop into a deep, soft bank of snow. The ticking stops. The numbers fade. The urgency dissolves into the white silence. Tonight, we are going to travel back to a world where that silence was the natural state of things. We are going on a very long journey. We will walk through centuries. We will stand in the marble halls of emperors and the mud huts of shepherds. We will watch the stars wheel overhead in the velvet sky of the Mediterranean. But to understand how the Roman calendar was built, we must first understand the world that existed before it. We must understand the chaos. We must understand the drift. So, get comfortable. Adjust your pillows. Let your shoulders sink away from your ears. Close your eyes. And let us drift backward, back through the years, back through the centuries, 2,700 years into the past. We are standing in the center of Italy, but it does not look like the Italy of postcards. There are no domes. There are no paved roads. There are no church bells ringing in the distance. There is only the land. The air here is thick with the scent of pine resin and wet earth. It is early morning, and a heavy mist is clinging to the valleys. Below us, a great river cuts through the landscape like a brown snake. The ancients called it Albula, the white water, before they renamed it the Tiber. It is a wild river. It floods every spring, drowning the lowlands in mud and silt, creating vast, malaria-filled marshes where mosquitoes whine in the humid air. Rising out of these marshes are 7 hills. They are steep, jagged hills, covered in dense forests of oak and home trees. Wolves live in these forests. Bears roam the slopes. It is a rugged, dangerous, and quiet place. On the tops of these hills, there are small clearings. And in these clearings, there are fires. If you look closely, you can see the smoke rising, thin grey ribbons stretching up toward the pale blue sky. These are the fires of the Latins and the Sabines. They are simple people. They are shepherds, mostly. Men and women who live their entire lives within the sound of their sheep bells. They wear tunics of rough wool. They live in round huts made of wattle and daub, woven branches plastered over with dried mud, topped with conical thatched roofs that look like large baskets turned upside down. Life here is slow. Life here is hard. And life here is dictated entirely by the sky. For these people, there is no Monday. There is no Tuesday. There is no 9 a.m. There is only the light and the dark. When the sun rises over the Alban Mountains in the east, the day begins. Not because a clock says so, but because the birds begin to sing and the warmth hits the skin. The shepherd opens the gate of his pen. The sheep flow out like water. When the sun climbs to its highest point, casting no shadows, it is time to rest. It is time to hide from the heat. And when the sun dips below the Tyrrhenian Sea in the west, painting the clouds in violet and gold, the day is over. The work stops. The gate is closed. The fire is lit. This is the solar day. It is the most basic unit of human experience. Up and down, awake and asleep, light and shadow. But a human life needs more than just days. A human life needs to measure the longer rhythms. A farmer needs to know when to plant the emmer wheat. If he plants too early, the frost will kill the seed in the ground. If he plants too late, the summer heat will scorch the young stalks before they can grow grain. A shepherd needs to know when the ewes will give birth, so he can bring them into the shelter of the caves. How do you measure these things without a calendar? You watch the world. You watch the trees. You wait for the specific week when the leaves of the fig tree turn a certain shade of green. You wait for the return of the migrating storks. You wait for the first true bite of the north wind. But the trees vary. The wind is unpredictable. The birds can be late. The early Romans needed something more reliable. They needed a clock that hung in the sky. And so, they looked at the moon. The moon is the oldest calendar. It is the original keeper of time for almost every ancient culture on Earth. It is easy to see why. The sun is blinding. You cannot look at it. It rarely changes, it is just a burning ball of fire, day after day. But the moon has a personality. The moon has a story. Imagine sitting on one of those 7 hills, wrapped in a sheepskin cloak, staring up at the night sky of 750 BC. There is no light pollution. The Milky Way is a thick band of diamond dust stretching from horizon to horizon. The stars are so bright they look wet. And there, floating among them, is the moon. At first, it is invisible. This is the new moon. The dark time. The nights when the wolves are boldest, because the shadows are absolute. Then, a night or two later, a thin fingernail of light appears. The crescent. The Romans called this the calends, a word related to calling out, because the priests would watch for this first sliver of light and shout the news to the village. The light has returned, they would say. A new cycle begins. Night after night, the crescent grows. It swells into a half circle. It bloats into a gibbous shape, like a pregnant belly. And finally, after about 14 days, it becomes the full moon. The Ides. The word Ides comes from an ancient Etruscan word meaning to divide. The full moon divides the month in half. It is the peak of the cycle. The night is no longer dark. The landscape is bathed in a cool, blue-white luminescence. You can see the river glittering in the valley below. You can see the shapes of the cattle sleeping in the fields. And then, the tragedy begins. The moon starts to wither. It shrinks. It loses its light, piece by piece, night after night, until it vanishes back into the blackness. Birth, growth, fullness, decay, death. It takes 29.5 days. This rhythm, this moon th, is deep in our biology. It roughly matches the tides of the ocean. It matches the cycles of the human body. It is a rhythm that feels right. So, the early shepherds on the 7 hills counted these cycles. I will meet you at the river in 3 moons, they would say. The baby will be born before 2 moons have passed. It was a lunar society. Soft. Cyclic. Approximate. But there was a problem. A quiet, mathematical problem that would eventually drive the Romans insane. The problem is the mismatch. The Earth does not travel around the Sun in a number of days that matches the Moon. A solar year, the time it takes for the seasons to fully repeat, is about 365 days. A lunar year, 12 cycles of the Moon, is only 354 days. There is a difference of 11 days. 11 days does not seem like much. If you are just a shepherd living in a hut, who cares if your year is 11 days short? The sheep do not care. The grass does not care. But if you keep counting by the moon, year after year, that error compounds. After 3 years, your calendar is off by a full month. After 6 years, you are off by 2 months. After 16 years, you are entirely upside down. If you rely purely on the moon, eventually, you will be celebrating the harvest festival in the middle of winter. You will be holding the spring planting ceremony while the leaves are falling in autumn. The time of the calendar drifts away from the time of the world. The early people of Italy dealt with this in a very casual way. They just stopped counting. When the stars didn't match the weather, they would shrug. They would add a month here, or skip a month there. They treated time like a loose garment, something to be adjusted, tightened, or loosened depending on how it felt. It was a chaotic, organic way to live. But chaos cannot build an empire. Chaos cannot build roads that span continents. Chaos cannot organize legions of 10,000 men. To build Rome, the shepherds needed to stop looking at the moon and start looking at the math. They needed a king. Let us move forward now. Let us watch the huts on the hills grow more numerous. The year is 753 BC. A legend is walking up the side of the Palatine Hill. He is a young man, barely 18 years old. He is strong, with wind-burned skin and eyes that have seen too much violence for his age. His name is Romulus. We all know the story or the myth of Romulus. We know the story of the twins, Romulus and Remus, cast into the river Tiber in a basket, left to die by a jealous uncle. We know the story of how they drifted into the reeds, crying in the cold mud. We know the story of the she-wolf, the lupa, a great beast who came down from the hills, not to devour them, but to nurse them. We know the story of the woodpecker who brought them food. Whether this is history or hallucination doesn't matter. What matters is what Romulus did when he became a man. He decided to build a wall. He stood on the Palatine Hill, the central hill, the one with the best view of the river crossing, and he took a plow. He yoked a white bull and a white cow together, and he cut a deep furrow into the earth in a sacred circle. This was the Pomerium, the sacred boundary. Everything inside this line was Rome. Everything outside was the wild. But Romulus knew that a wall was not enough. You can build a wall out of stone, but a city is made of people. And people are messy. People fight. People forget. People disagree. To rule them, Romulus needed to control 2 things, space and time. He controlled space with the wall. Now, he needed to control time with a calendar. Romulus was a warrior. He was not a scientist. He was not a philosopher. He was a man of the spear and the shield. When he looked at the world, he saw things in terms of action. There is a time for war, and there is a time for farming. To Romulus, the winter did not matter. In the winter, you cannot fight, because the roads are mud and the mountain passes are snowed in. In the winter, you cannot farm, because the ground is frozen hard as iron. So, in the mind of Romulus, winter was not time. Winter was a pause. Winter was death. So when he sat down with his advisors to create the official calendar of the Roman people, he made a decision that seems utterly bizarre to our modern minds. He decided to create a year that had only 10 months. He looked at the moon cycles, and he laid them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lunar cycles is roughly 304 days. This is the year, Romulus declared. But King, an advisor might have whispered, what about the other days? The sun cycle is longer. There are still 50 or 60 days left before spring returns. One can imagine Romulus waving his hand dismissively. Those days do not count, he would say. Those are the days of darkness. The days of waiting. We will not name them. We will not count them. When the winter comes, we will simply wait. And so, the calendar of Romulus was born. A calendar with a gaping hole at the end. A calendar that fell asleep. Let us look at this strange, 10-month year. Let us listen to the names he chose. Because the names of the months are one of the few things that have survived from that ancient hilltop to the screen of the phone in your pocket right now. Romulus began the year in the spring. Of course he did. Spring is life. The first month was named in honor of his own father, the god who he believed had sired him. Mars. Martius. We call it March. For the Romans, the first of Martius was the greatest day of the year. It was New Year's Day. It was the day the sacred fire in the Temple of Vesta was relit. It was the day the fresh laurel wreaths were hung on the doors of the high priests. Imagine the feeling of Martius in ancient Rome. The frost is melting. The ground is turning to mud. The air smells of wet grass. And everywhere, there is the sound of metal sharpening against stone. Swords are being polished. Spears are being checked. Armor is being strapped on. Martius was the month of the march. The month of the army. The calendar began with a shout of war. Then came the second month. The month of the earth opening. The month when the flowers cracked their seeds and pushed up toward the sun. Aprilis. Some say it came from the word aperia, to open. Others say it was sacred to Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, the softener of hearts. April was the time for farmers to look at their vineyards. It was the time to trust the soil. Then came the third month, Maius, named for Maia, a quiet, ancient earth goddess. The goddess of growth. The goddess of the nursing mother. In Maius, the crops are rising. The lambs are getting strong. The risk of frost has passed. The world is safe again. Then, the fourth month, Iunius, June, named for Juno, the queen, the protector of women, the wife of Jupiter. June was the month of power, of fullness. The sun is high. The days are long. 4 months. 4 gods. Mars, Venus, Maia, Juno. But then, it seems that Romulus got tired. Or perhaps, being a practical soldier, he simply stopped caring about poetry. He looked at the 5th month and said, "We shall call it the 5th." In Latin, quinque means 5. So the month became quintilis. He looked at the 6th month, the 6th, sextilis, the 7th, September, from septem, meaning 7, the 8th, October, from octo, meaning 8, the 9th, November, from novum, meaning 9, and the 10th, the final month of the year, December, from decem, meaning 10, and that was it. Martius through December, 304 days. Imagine reaching the end of December. You have harvested your grain. You have salted your meat. The days are short and cold. You tear the last page off the calendar. And then, you step into the void. They did not have a name for the time that came next. Historians call it the winter gap. For roughly 61 days, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on when the priests decided spring had arrived, Rome just drifted. There were no official trade deals conducted during the gap. No trials were held. The army disbanded and went home to their farms. The Senate rarely met. It was a time out of time. Try to imagine how relaxing that would be. In our modern world, we are obsessed with continuity. We feel that every second must be accounted for. We move from December 31st instantly into January 1st. There is no break. The wheel keeps turning. But the Romans of Romulus's time had a built-in rest. They had a period where they acknowledged that humanity is not a machine. They acknowledged that when the earth sleeps, we should sleep too. 60 days of quiet. 60 days of family. 60 days of mending nets, sharpening tools, and telling stories by the fire while the wind howled outside. They surrendered to the winter. But, as we said, this system was flawed. The moon cycles shift. The seasons drift. And the gap became a problem. Sometimes, the priests would declare that Martius had arrived, but the snow was still waist deep. The soldiers would march out, shivering, their sandals slipping on the ice. Sometimes, they would wait too long. They would wait for the new moon, but the trees were already blooming. They had missed the start of the planting season. A society of 10 months was a society of approximation. It was a society of good enough. But Rome was destined to be more than good enough. And so, after Romulus died, taken up into the sky in a whirlwind, as the legends say, the people looked for a new king. They did not want another warrior. They were tired of war. They were tired of the constant marching of Martius. They wanted wisdom. They wanted order. They wanted someone who could talk to the gods and fix the broken time. They found a man living in the Sabine hills. A man with grey in his beard and dirt under his fingernails. A man who did not want the job. His name was Numa Pompilius. And he is the one who would give us the names that are on your calendar today. He is the one who would reach into the winter void and pull out January and February. But that is a story for the next section. We left the early Romans in a state of suspension. We left them at the end of December, standing on the edge of a cliff in time. Behind them lay the 10 months of the year. Ahead of them lay the winter void, the 60 days of darkness where the calendar simply stopped. It was a system built by a warrior, Romulus. It was a system built for action, for summer, for life in the sun. But it was not a system built for the soul. And so, as the legend goes, after 37 years of rule, Romulus disappeared. The city of Rome, still young, still made of mud and timber, needed a new father. The Senate, the gathering of elders, did not look for another general. They were tired of the sword. They looked instead for a man of silence. They found him living in a small, unpretentious village called Cures, deep in the Sabine hills. His name was Numa Pompilius. Numa is perhaps the most important man in the history of the calendar, yet he is the one we talk about the least. He was 40 years old. He had long, graying hair and a beard that was never trimmed. He did not care for luxury. He did not care for power. When the ambassadors from Rome came to him, bearing the purple robes of the king, he initially refused. "Why would I want to rule a city of wolves?" he might have asked. He preferred the company of the trees. He preferred the geometry of the spiderwebs in the morning dew. But eventually, he accepted. And when he came to Rome, he did not bring an army. He brought a sense of rhythm. Numa looked at the Roman year, that broken, 10-month line, and he saw the problem immediately. You cannot have a society that ignores the winter. Winter is not nothing. Winter is incubation. It is the time when the earth sleeps, yes, but it is also the time when the roots go deep. It is the time of purification. If the calendar has a hole in it, the society has a hole in it. So, Numa decided to stitch the year together. He decided to close the circle. He looked at the 60 days of the winter gap, the days that Romulus had thrown away, and he decided to give them names. He decided to carve 2 new sanctuaries out of the cold. The first month he created was to be the gateway. In ancient Rome, gateways were sacred. The door of a house, the gate of a city, these were not just physical openings. They were spiritual barriers. Crossing a threshold was a dangerous act. You were moving from one state of being to another, from outside to inside, from war to peace, from the past to the future. There was a god who ruled over these thresholds. His name was Janus. Janus is a strange and beautiful figure in mythology. He is almost always depicted with 2 faces on a single head. One face looks to the left, back at what has been. The other face looks to the right, toward what will be. He sees everything. He is the god of beginnings, the god of transitions. Numa dedicated the first part of the winter to him. He named the new month Januarius, January. Think of the feeling of January. Even now, thousands of years later, it carries the energy of Numa's intention. January is cold. It is crisp. The festivities of December are over. The noise has died down. The world is stripped bare. The trees are skeletons against the grey sky. It is a time for looking at the year ahead. It is a time for resolutions. A time for planning. A time for standing in the doorway and deciding which way to walk. Numa placed this month at the beginning of the darkness. It was a promise that even though the winter was here, there was a structure to it. We were not lost in the void. We were in the house of Janus. But Ianuarius was not enough. There was still time left in the dark. Numa looked at the weeks leading up to spring. The time when the snow turns to slush. The time when the food stores in the root cellars are getting low. The time when people feel heavy, lethargic, and dirty from a long winter spent indoors near smoky fires. He decided that before the new year could truly begin, before the march of Mars could start again, the people needed to be clean. They needed a spiritual bath. There were ancient rituals for this, known as the Februa. The Februa were tools of purification. Sometimes it was a specific type of wool used to wipe down the altars. Sometimes it was a branch of pine used to sweep the temple floors. Sometimes it was water, drawn from the deepest part of the running stream. Numa gathered these rituals together and created the month of Februarius. February, the month of cleaning, the month of purging. In the ancient world, February was a solemn time. It was not a happy month. It was a month of ghosts. During February, the Romans celebrated the Parentalia, a 9-day festival to honor their ancestors. They would walk out to the cemeteries outside the city walls. They would leave small offerings, a wreath of flowers, a pinch of salt, a piece of bread soaked in wine. It was a quiet month. A month of whispering to the dead. A month of sweeping out the old dust of the previous year so that the House of Rome would be ready for the explosion of life in March. So now, Numa had done it. He had taken the 10 months of Romulus, Martius, Aprilis, Maius, Iunius, Quintilis, Sextilis, September, October, November, December, and he had added Ianuarius and Februarius. 12 months. The circle was closed. The year was whole. But Numa was not just a priest. He was also a man who was obsessed with numbers. And as he looked at his new creation, he realized that the math was wrong. This brings us to one of the most fascinating and bizarre aspects of the Roman mind, Pythagorean numerology. The Romans were engineers. They built aqueducts that are still standing today. They built roads that are still being driven on. They were practical people. But they were also deeply, intensely superstitious. And their greatest fear was the even number. To the ancient mind, an odd number, 3, 5, 7, was masculine, strong, and divine. An odd number cannot be divided easily. It stands on its own. It has a center. But an even number, 2, 4, 8, was feminine, weak, and earthly. It could be split apart. It had no center. It represented duality. And duality represented conflict. Therefore, even numbers were unlucky. Numa Pompilius, the priest-king, wanted his calendar to be a holy object. He wanted it to be lucky. He wanted it to protect the city. So, he made a rule: no month shall have an even number of days. This seems like a small detail, but it made the construction of the calendar an absolute nightmare of arithmetic. He looked at the months of Romulus. The old months had 30 days. That was an even number. Unacceptable. The old months had 31 days. That was odd. That was good. So, Numa took his chisel to the stone of time. He started shaving off days. He took a day from April. He took a day from June. He took a day from August, September, November, December. He reduced them all to 29 days. 29 is a prime number. It is odd. It is hard. It is lucky. He kept March, May, July, and October at 31 days. So now, he had a year where every single month was a perfect, lucky, odd number. Narrator speaks slowly, listing the rhythm: Martius, 31. Aprilis, 29. Maius, 31. Iunius, 29. Quintilis, 31. Sextilis, 29. September, 29. October, 31. November, 29. December, 29. Ianuarius, 29. It was beautiful. It was holy. But then, Numa did the final sum. He added them all up. If you have 12 odd numbers, and you add them together, the result is always an even number. The total came to 354. Numa stared at the number. 354. An even number. A bad number. A number that would bring bad luck to the entire year. He could not let the year be even. So, he made a difficult choice. He needed one more day. He needed to make the year 355 days long. 355 is odd. 355 is lucky. But where could he get that one extra day? And where could he put it? He had to sacrifice a month. He had to choose one month to be the unlucky one. 1 month to carry the burden of the even number so that the rest of the year could be safe. He looked at his new creations. He looked at Februarius. It was the month of the dead. It was the month of purification. It was already a dark, solemn time. Let February carry the weight, he decided. And so, he assigned 28 days to February. 28. An even number. A broken number. This is why, 2,700 years later, when you look at the calendar on your wall, February is the strange one. February is the short one. It is not an accident of history. It is a scar left by a superstition. It is a deliberate design by a king who was afraid of the number 2. And so, the calendar of Numa was set. 355 days. 12 months. It was better than the calendar of Romulus. It covered the winter. It had a rhythm. But, the attentive listener will notice a problem. The sun does not care about lucky numbers. The sun does not care about Numa's desire for odd digits. The Earth takes 365 1/4 days to orbit the sun. Numa's calendar was only 355 days. Every single year, the Roman calendar was 10 days shorter than the solar year. 10 days. Imagine a clock that runs 10 minutes fast every hour. Eventually, day becomes night. In the Roman system, eventually, January would drift into autumn. Martius would drift into winter. The harvest festivals would drift into the planting season. Numa knew this. He was not a fool. He knew that his lunar year was too short. So he created a mechanism to fix it. a mechanism that was clumsy, awkward, and prone to corruption. He created the mensis intercalaris, the intercalary month, a leap month. Every 2 or 3 years, the Romans were supposed to simply add a new month, a 13th month. They called it Mercedonius. The word comes from merx, meaning wages, because it was the time when workers were paid for the extra labor. Imagine this. You are living your life. It is the end of February. You are expecting March to begin tomorrow. You are expecting spring. But suddenly, the high priest steps out onto the steps of the temple and says, "Citizens, the year has drifted too far. March is delayed. We are now entering the month of Mercedonius. There will be 22 extra days this year." And just like that, the year stretched. It was a patch, a bandage on a broken leg. And for a while, under the reign of the kings, it worked. Because the kings were honest. They added the month when the stars said it was necessary. But kings do not last forever. Rome became a republic. The kings were cast out. The power passed to the Senate. And the control of the calendar passed to a group of men called the pontiffs. And men are easily corrupted. In the next section, we will see what happens when you give politicians the power to control time itself. We will see how they used the calendar to cheat elections, to hide from debts, and to create a chaos so profound that the Romans began to call their own era the years of confusion. We have built the machine. Under the guidance of King Numa, Rome had a calendar. It had 12 months. It had names that we still use today. It had a rhythm of purification and preparation. But a machine is only as good as the people who operate it. And as the centuries turned, the simple shepherds of the 7 hills were replaced by a new breed of men. The kings were gone. Rome was now a republic. It was an era of laws, an era of elections, an era of ambition. And in this new world, the calendar ceased to be a measure of the seasons. It became something far more dangerous. It became a tool of power. Let us drift forward now. Let us leave the quiet groves of Numa and step onto the stone pavement of the Roman Forum in the 2nd century BC. The air here is different. It does not smell of wood smoke and pine. It smells of dust, unwashed wool, olive oil, and the sweat of 10,000 people crowding into the market. In the center of this chaos stands the Regia, the royal house. It was the office of the high priest, the Pontifex Maximus. Inside this building, kept under lock and key, were the fasti, the official tables of time. You see, in the Roman Republic, you could not just look at a calendar on your wall to know what day it was. You had to be told. The calendar was not public knowledge. It was a state secret. The priests, the pontiffs, were the guardians of time. It was their job to track the moon. It was their job to track the sun. And, most importantly, it was their job to decide when to insert the leap month, Mercedonius. Remember Numa's math. His year was only 355 days long. It was 10 days short of the sun. To keep the calendar in sync with the seasons, the priests had to add an extra month roughly every 2 or 3 years. If they did their job correctly, the system worked. The harvest happened in the fall. The snow fell in the winter. But the pontiffs, were not just priests. They were politicians. Imagine you are a Roman consul, the equivalent of a president. You are elected for a one-year term. You have 12 months to make your mark on history. You want to pass laws. You want to command armies. You want to defeat your enemies. But your time is running out. It is December. Your term is almost over. So, you go to the high priest. Perhaps you are friends. Perhaps you invite him to a lavish dinner with the finest Falernian wine. Perhaps you slip a bag of gold denarii into his hand. And you whisper, "The year feels short, doesn't it? Surely, the seasons are off. Surely, we need a leap month this year." If the priest agrees, he declares a Mercedonius. Suddenly, your one-year term is not 355 days. It is 378 days. You have bought yourself 3 more weeks of power. 3 more weeks to pass your laws. 3 more weeks to prosecute your enemies. But now, imagine the opposite. Imagine you are the high priest, and your political enemy has just been elected consul. You hate him. You want him out of office as soon as possible. So, when the end of the year comes, and the stars suggest that a leap month is needed, you stay silent. You ignore the drift. You let the year end early. You rob him of his time. For over 200 years, this corruption ate away at the heart of the Roman year. The calendar became a weapon. It was stretched and compressed like an accordion, depending on who was winning the elections that year. And the result was the drift. Slowly, agonizingly, the months began to detach from the seasons. The farmers were the first to notice. Imagine a farmer in the Roman countryside. He cannot read the Senate records. He does not care about politics. He only knows the earth. He knows that September, the 7th month, is supposed to be the time of the late summer heat. It is the time to harvest the grapes. But because the priests have skipped so many leap months, the calendar has drifted forward. The calendar says September, but the sky says November. The farmer stands in his vineyard. The official date is the Ides of September. He should be picking grapes. But there is frost on the vines. The leaves are brown and dead. The grapes have shriveled. He is confused. The gods seem angry. The connection between the name of the month and the reality of the world has been severed. This happened not just once, but over and over again. By the time we reach the year 50 BC, the Roman calendar was roughly 3 months, 90 days out of alignment with the sun. 90 days. Think about that. The calendar said it was January, the middle of winter, the time for heavy cloaks and fires. But if you walked outside, the sun was blazing. The wheat was high in the fields. It was actually autumn. The calendar said it was July, the time of heat. But if you walked outside, it was snowing. It was a world of cognitive dissonance. The official reality, the dates written on the legal documents, did not match the physical reality of the universe. And yet, the Romans, with their intense respect for tradition, just kept going. They held the harvest festivals when the calendar told them to, even if there was nothing to harvest. They held the spring flower festivals in the dead of winter, carrying garlands of fake flowers because the real ones hadn't bloomed yet. It was a performance, a ritual enacted in the face of absurdity. The confusion was not just annoying, it was paralyzing. Generals didn't know when to schedule supply ships. If you send a ship across the Mediterranean in March, you expect calm seas. But if it is actually December in the real world, your ship will be destroyed by winter storms. Merchants couldn't calculate interest on loans. "I will pay you back in 3 months," meant nothing if a priest could suddenly decide that this month was 40 days long. The clock of civilization was broken. Rome was the master of the Mediterranean. It had conquered Greece. It had conquered Carthage. It had conquered Gaul. It was the superpower of the ancient world. But it could not tell the time. It needed a reset. It needed a revolution. And as is so often the case in history, the revolution came in the form of one man. A man who was both a brilliant general and a ruthless politician. A man who had just spent years fighting in the north, away from the intrigues of the city. Julius Caesar. In the year 48 BC, Caesar defeated his rival Pompey and became the undisputed master of Rome. He was named dictator. When he returned to Rome, he found a city in chaos. The streets were dangerous. The debt crisis was exploding. And the calendar was a joke. Caesar was a man of order. He hated inefficiency. He looked at the pontiffs, the priests who had manipulated the years for their own gain, and he felt disgust. He didn't just want to fix the politics. He wanted to fix the universe. But Caesar knew he couldn't do it alone. He was a soldier, not a scientist. He needed knowledge that Rome did not possess. He needed the stars. And to find the masters of the stars, he had to go east. He had to go to the land of ancient wisdom. The land of the pyramids. He had to go to Egypt. We are going to drift now to a different setting. Let the stone streets of Rome fade away. Let the noise of the Forum dissolve. Feel the air get warmer, drier. Feel the gentle rocking motion of a barge on a massive, slow-moving river. The Nile. It is 47 BC. Julius Caesar is in Egypt. And he is not alone. He is with Cleopatra, the queen of the Nile. She is young, brilliant, and mesmerizing. She speaks a dozen languages. And unlike the Romans, who looked at the sky with superstition, her people looked at the sky with mathematics. The Egyptians had solved the problem thousands of years ago. They knew the year was not 355 days. They knew the moon was a distraction. They worshipped the sun, Ra. And they knew the sun's cycle was 365 days long. Legend says that while Caesar and Cleopatra floated down the Nile on her golden barge, under the canopy of the desert stars, she explained the solar year to him. She showed him the Sirius star. She explained that the Nile flooded on the exact same day every year, driven by the sun, not the moon. Caesar was captivated, not just by the queen, but by the logic. Why, he wondered, is Rome still stumbling in the dark, counting moon cycles like primitive shepherds, when we could be walking in the light of the sun? He decided, there on the river, that he would bring this knowledge back to Rome. He would steal the sun from Egypt and install it in the Roman sky. He asked Cleopatra to give him her best scholar, her best astronomer. She introduced him to a man named Sosigenes, Sosigenes of Alexandria. Remember that name. He is the ghost in the machine. He is the man who actually did the math. He is the quiet Greek astronomer who stood in the shadow of Caesar and redesigned the flow of human history. Sosigenes packed his scrolls. He packed his astrolabes. He boarded the ship with Caesar. He was coming to Rome to commit an act of chronological violence. He was about to tell the Romans that everything they knew about time was wrong. But before they could fix the future, they had to pay the debt of the past. The calendar was 90 days out of sync. You cannot just start over. You have to catch up. You have to live through the missing time. And so, Caesar and Sosigenes prepared to inflict upon the world the strangest, longest, and most confusing year that humanity has ever endured. The year of confusion. 46 BC. But the story of that year, the year that would not end, is a story for the next section. Imagine waking up in the morning, looking out your window, and not knowing what season it is. Imagine the calendar on your wall saying October, but the trees outside are budding with the green leaves of spring. Imagine being told that this year will not end when it is supposed to. That December will come and go, and the year will just keep going. This is not science fiction. This is the historical reality of the year 46 BC. Historians call it Annus Confusionis, the year of confusion. But later scholars gave it a more accurate name. They called it the last year of darkness. We are now standing at the tipping point of history. Julius Caesar is the dictator of Rome. He has returned from Egypt with the astronomer Sosigenes. He carries in his pocket the secret of the solar year, the perfect 365-day cycle. He is ready to install this new system. He is ready to fix the broken clock of Rome. But there is a physical problem. You cannot just swap the calendars overnight. The old calendar, the corrupt, drifting lunar calendar we discussed in the last section, was 90 days out of sync with the sun. If Caesar simply said, "Today is now the new calendar," the months would remain broken forever. January would essentially be October. The harvest would happen in the winter. The seasons would be permanently locked in the wrong boxes. To fix the future, Caesar had to repair the past. He had to put the 90 missing days back into the year. He had to make the year 46 BC long enough to catch up with the sun. So, he did something that no human being had ever done before, and has never done since. He stretched the year. Let us walk through this year. Let us feel the strangeness of it. The year 46 BC began normally. The Romans celebrated Martius. They celebrated Aprilis. But then, the announcements began. Caesar, acting as the high priest, inserted the traditional leap month, Mercedonius. That added 23 days. The people sighed. Another long year, they thought. Typical politics. But then, as the year drew to a close, as November turned into December, Caesar made another announcement. He declared that 2 new months that had never existed before, were being added to the end of the year. He called them intercalaris prior and intercalaris posterior, the first extra and the second extra. He placed them between November and December, 33 days, and 34 days, 6 to 7 extra days of waiting. When you add it all up, the normal year, plus Mercedonius, plus the 2 new months, the year 46 BC was 445 days long. 445. It was a year that refused to die. Pause. Try to imagine living through it. The psychological sensation of a year that lasts 15 months. The harvest was finished. The barns were full. The work was done. But the calendar said, wait. It was a state of limbo. The Roman historian Suetonius tells us that the people were baffled. They made jokes in the market. The constellations are rising by official decree now, they would say, looking at stars that shouldn't be there. Cicero, the famous orator, wrote letters complaining about it. He felt trapped in a year that felt like a prison. But for the common person, perhaps it was a relief. Think of it as the ultimate winter gap. Caesar had essentially created a massive, 3-month pause button for the entire civilization. During these extra months, the sun continued to move. The Earth continued to orbit. And slowly, day by day, the seasons drifted back into their correct places. The winter snows finally aligned with January. The budding trees finally aligned with March. It was like watching a blurry image slowly coming into focus. Caesar was not just ruling Rome, he was grabbing the zodiac by the throat and wrestling it back into alignment. And then, finally, the year 46 BC ended. The sun set on the final day of the second extra month. The long nightmare of confusion was over. And the next morning, the sun rose on the first day of the new era. The Julian calendar. January 1st, 45 BC. This is the birthday of the time you use right now. When the Romans woke up on this morning, the world was different. It was fixed. Sosigenes, the Egyptian astronomer, had done his math perfectly. He had abandoned the moon. He told the Romans, forget the cycles of the moon. They are beautiful, but they are useless for time. Look only at the sun. The new year was simple, elegant, rigid. 365 days. Sosigenes took the 10 days that were missing from Numa's old calendar, and he sprinkled them throughout the year like seasoning. He added 2 days to January. Now it had 31. He added a day to April, a day to June, a day to September. He sculpted the months into the shapes we know today. 30 days have September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31. Except for February. Poor February. Even Caesar, with all his power, did not want to touch the month of the dead. He left it short. 28 days. The scar of superstition remained. But Sosigenes knew that 365 days is not exactly right. The true solar year is 365.2425 days. That quarter of a day is the problem. You cannot have a quarter of a day on a calendar. You cannot have a day that is only 6 hours long. So, Sosigenes invented the leap year. Every 4 years, he said, we will take those 4 quarters, add them together, and make one full day. Where did they put this extra day? They gave it to February, the runt of the litter. Every 4th year, February would get a 29th day. It was a masterpiece of logic. It was a triumph of order over chaos. For the first time in human history, a civilization had a calendar that would not drift. A calendar that would stay locked to the seasons for centuries. Or so they thought. There is a tragic irony to this moment. Caesar gave the world the gift of time. He gave us the structure that governs our lives today. But he did not have much time left for himself. The Julian calendar went into effect on January 1st, 45 BC. Caesar would live to see that first year. He would see the harvest happen at the right time. He would see the leaves fall when the calendar said they should. He must have felt a tremendous sense of satisfaction. The universe was obeying him. But he would not see the second year. On the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, just 1 year and 3 months after fixing time, Julius Caesar walked into the theatre of Pompeii. He was surrounded by senators, men who feared his power, men who hated the way he had reshaped the Republic and the calendar to fit his will. We know the story. The 23 daggers. The fall of the dictator. Caesar died on the floor of the Senate. But here is the thing about time, it outlasts us. Caesar was gone, but his calendar remained. The senators who killed him, they still had to use his dates. When they wrote letters planning their defenses, they dated them using Caesar's months. When they planned their battles, they used Caesar's year. They could kill the man, but they could not kill the logic. In fact, the calendar became his monument. Shortly after his death, the Romans realized that the old month names, Quintilis, the 5th month, were not enough. Caesar had been born in Quintilis. It was the month of heat, of power, of the high sun. Mark Antony, Caesar's general, proposed a change. "Why do we call it the 5th?" he asked. "Let us name it after the man who gave us the sun." And so, Quintilis was erased. And in its place, they wrote, Julius. July. Every time you say the word July, you are speaking the name of a dead Roman dictator. You are honoring the man who suffered through the year of confusion so that you wouldn't have to. So now, the machine is almost perfect. We have 12 months. We have 365 days. We have a leap year. We have January, February, March, April, May, June, July. But wait. What comes next? Sextilis. The 6th month. That sounds wrong to our modern ears. We do not have a month called Sextilis. We have August. How did that happen? Well, after Caesar died, his adopted son took the throne. A teenager named Octavian, who would grow up to become the first emperor of Rome, Augustus Caesar. Augustus was a man of cool, calculated perfection. He was not a wild genius like Julius. He was an administrator. And when he looked at the calendar his father had built, he noticed a mistake. The priests, those same confusing priests who had messed up the old calendar, were messing up the new one. Sosigenes had said, add a leap day every 4 years. But the Roman priests, they couldn't count. They were counting inclusively. They were adding a leap day every 3 years. 1, 2, 3, leap. 1, 2, 3, leap. The calendar was drifting again. Faster this time. Augustus sighed. He stepped in. He ordered the leap years to stop completely for 12 years, to let the time settle back down. He fixed the math. He enforced the 4-year rule with an iron fist. He saved the Julian calendar from its own creators. And the Senate, grateful for his wisdom and terrified of his power, decided that he, too, deserved a place in the sky. They looked at the month after July. Sextilis. It was a good month. It was the month of the great triumphs. The month when Egypt had been conquered. Let it be named Augustus, they declared. August. But there is a famous story, perhaps true, perhaps a myth, about the number of days. July, the month of Julius Caesar, had 31 days. Sextilis, the month of Augustus, had only 30. Could the emperor be smaller than the dictator? Could the son be lesser than the father? Impossible. Roman vanity would not allow it. So, the story goes that they went back to February, that poor, battered month, and they stole yet another day. They took the 29th day of February and moved it to August. Now, August had 31 days. It was equal to July. And February? February was left with 28. The permanent victim of history. And so, by the year 8 AD, the structure was complete. The names were set. The days were set. The Roman Empire spread this calendar across the world. From the rainy shores of Britain to the deserts of Syria, everyone marched to the beat of the Julian drum. For 1,500 years, this calendar reigned supreme. Kings were born and died under it. Cathedrals were built under it. The entire Middle Ages happened within the framework of Caesar's math. It seemed perfect. It seemed eternal. But Sosigenes had made a tiny, microscopic mistake. He had calculated the year as 365.25 days. But the actual year is 365.24219 days. The difference is tiny. It is about 11 minutes per year. 11 minutes. You can blink and miss it. It is nothing. But time is relentless. 11 minutes a year adds up. In a century, it is 18 hours. In 4 centuries, it is 3 days. Slowly, silently, invisibly, the Julian calendar was drifting. It wasn't drifting as fast as the old Roman one. It was a glacier compared to a landslide. But it was moving. Easter was slipping away from the spring equinox. The religious holidays were sliding out of place. The clock was ticking. And by the time we reached the 1500s, the world was 10 days out of sync. The ghost of the drift had returned. And it would take a pope, a new astronomer, and a riot in the streets to fix it for the last time. We have built the year. We have built the month. We have locked the sun into a grid of 365 days. We have named the 12 months after gods and emperors. But there is one more rhythm that governs our lives. A rhythm that feels so natural, so inevitable, that we rarely stop to question it. The week. Monday. Tuesday. Wednesday. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 7 days. A constant, beating drum in the background of human existence. But unlike the year, which is the time it takes the Earth to go around the Sun, and unlike the month, which is the time it takes the Moon to go around the Earth, the week is not natural. There is nothing in the sky that happens in 7 days. If you look at the stars, they do not care about Wednesday. If you watch the tides, they do not stop on Sunday. The 7-day week is an invention. It is a mathematical cage that we chose to step into. And for a very long time, the Romans did not use it. Let us go back to the streets of Rome before the Empire. If you asked a Roman farmer in the time of the Republic, "What day of the week is it?" he would look at you with confusion. The early Romans lived in an 8-day cycle. It was called the Nundini. The word comes from novum, meaning 9, because they counted inclusively from one market day to the next was 9 days in their math. The Nundini was not religious. It was economic. For 7 days, you worked in the fields. You tended the sheep. You pruned the vines. You stayed on your farm, isolated and busy. On the 8th day, you went to town. The 8th day was market day. The city gates were thrown open. The farmers brought their cheese and their wool. The city dwellers brought their coins. It was a day of noise, gossip, news, and trade. Schools were closed. Haircuts were given. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. That was the Roman week. 8 letters carved into stone calendars to mark the days. It was a practical cycle, but it had no soul. And as Rome expanded, as its legions marched into the east, into Babylon, into Egypt, into Syria, they encountered a different rhythm. A rhythm that was older and more mystical. The rhythm of the 7. Why 7? Why is the number 7 so powerful in the human imagination? The 7 wonders of the world. The 7 seas. The 7 deadly sins. It comes from the sky. Before the telescope, before satellites, before we understood the vastness of the cosmos, the ancient astronomers looked up and saw 7 wanderers. There were the fixed stars, which never moved relative to each other. And then, there were the 7 lights that danced across the sky. The sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. 7 gods, 7 powers, 7 days. The Babylonians believed that each of these gods ruled over a specific day. And if you wanted to live in harmony with the universe, you had to honor the god of that day. Slowly, this idea seeped into Rome. The soldiers brought it home from the wars. The merchants brought it home from the ports. And gradually, the sturdy, practical 8-day market cycle was replaced by the mystical 7-day planetary week. Let us listen to the names of these days. Because when you speak them, even now, you are speaking a spell. You are calling out the names of the planets. The Romans began their week with the most important object in the sky, dies solis, the day of the sun, Sunday. Then came the second light, the gentle reflector, dies luni, the day of the moon, Monday. Then, the rhythm becomes more interesting. because our English names for the days are a mixture. They are a handshake between the Latin South and the Germanic North. The Romans called the third day Dies Martis, the day of Mars, the red planet, the god of war. In the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, this name survived. In Spanish, it is Martes. In French, Mardi. But in English, we did not pray to Mars. The Anglo-Saxon ancestors looked at Mars and said, "We have our own god of war. We have the one-handed god, the god of justice and combat." His name was Ty, and so, the day of Mars became Ty's Day, Tuesday. The fourth day. The Romans looked at the fast-moving planet, the one that darted near the sun, never staying still. They named it after the messenger god, the god of commerce, travel, and thieves. Mercury. Dies Mercurii. In Spanish, miércoles. In French, Mercredi. But the northern tribes looked at Mercury, the traveler, the wise one, the guide of souls, and they equated him with their own chief god. The All-Father, the Wanderer, the god with the one eye and the ravens, Odin, or, in the old dialect, Wooden. And so, the day of Mercury became Wooden's Day. Wednesday. The fifth day. The Romans looked at the brightest, most majestic planet, the king of the gods, the thunder thrower, Jupiter, Jove, Dies Jovis. In Spanish, Juves. In Italian, Giovedi. The northerners looked at Jupiter and saw the thunderer. But they did not call him Jove. They called him the redhead with the hammer, the protector of mankind, Thor. And so, the day of Jupiter became Thor's day. Thursday. The sixth day. The Romans looked at the morning star, the most beautiful, shining light in the dawn sky. They named it after the goddess of love and beauty, Venus. Dies Veneris. In Spanish, Viernes. In French, Vendredi. The northerners looked at Venus and saw their own goddess of love, the wife of Odin, the spinner of clouds, Frigg, or Freya. And so, the day of Venus became Frigg's day, Friday. And then, the seventh day. The Romans named it after the slowest planet, the heavy, golden planet that takes 30 years to cross the sky, the god of time, the god of agriculture, the god of limits, Saturn. Dies Saturni. And here, strangely, the English language did not change it. We did not find a northern god to replace Saturn. Perhaps he was too powerful. Perhaps his scythe was too sharp. So we kept it. Saturn's Day. Saturday. 7 days. 7 gods. Sun, Moon, Ty, Wooden, Thor, Frigg, Saturn. Every time you schedule a meeting for Wednesday, you are invoking the ghost of Odin. Every time you look forward to Friday, you are waiting for the day of Venus. The week is a museum of mythology. This 7-day cycle was officially adopted by the Emperor Constantine in the year 321 AD. Constantine was the bridge between the old pagan world and the new Christian world. He was a clever politician. He saw that the 7-day week pleased everyone. The Christians liked it because of the book of Genesis, the 7 days of creation. The pagans liked it because of the 7 planets. So Constantine made it law. Let all judges and all city people and all craftsmen rest on the venerable day of the sun, he declared. Sunday became the anchor, the day of rest. And with that decree, the rhythm of the modern world was set. The 8-day market cycle of the early farmers faded away. The letters A through H were erased from the calendar stones. Now, we lived in the cycle of 7. But, as the Roman Empire began to crumble, as the marble columns fell and the aqueducts ran dry, another change was happening. A change not in the days, but in the years. We had the day. We had the week. We had the month. We had the Julian year. But what year was it? If you asked a Roman in the time of Julius Caesar, what year is it? He would not say 45 BC. That counts backward. You can't count backward if you don't know where the end is. He would say, it is the year of the consulship of Caesar and Lepidus. Or, if he was a historian, he might say, it is the year 708 AB Urbi Condita. 708 years since the founding of the city. The Romans counted from the foundation of Rome, 753 BC. But as Christianity took hold of Europe, the monks and scholars began to feel uncomfortable using a dating system based on a pagan city. They wanted a new starting point, a holy starting point. In the year 525 AD, long after the Western Empire had fallen, a monk named Dionysius Exiguus, Dionysius the Humble, sat in a library in Rome. He was working on a table to calculate the date of Easter. He looked at the current year. It was being called the year of Diocletian, named after a Roman emperor who had persecuted Christians. Dionysius did not want to write that name. He did not want to honor a persecutor. So, he did some math. He calculated back through the reigns of the emperors. He counted the years of Augustus, of Tiberius, of Nero. He tried to pinpoint the exact year of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. He came up with a number, and he declared that year to be year 1. Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. He did not include a year 0. The concept of 0 had not yet traveled from India to Europe. So the timeline went straight from 1 BC to 1 AD. There is a quiet gap there, a mathematical hiccup. And, as modern historians have found, Dionysius was probably slightly wrong. He likely missed the birth date by 4 or 5 years. But it didn't matter. The system stuck. Slowly, over centuries, the kings of Europe began to date their charters and their treaties in the year of our Lord. The Roman years of the city faded. The years of the consuls were forgotten. The timeline became a straight arrow, shooting forward from that single calculated point in history. So now, we have the complete picture. We have the Julian calendar running the days and months. We have the planetary week running the cycle of work and rest. We have the Anno Domini system counting the years. It was the Middle Ages. The bells of the monasteries rang out the hours. The peasants worked the fields on Woden's day and rested on the sun's day. Everything seemed stable. Everything seemed permanent. But remember the 11 minutes. Remember the tiny, microscopic error that Sosigenes left in the math of Julius Caesar. 11 minutes per year. While the monks prayed and the knights fought, the calendar was drifting. By the time we reached the 1500s, the drift had become a crisis. The spring equinox, the official start of spring, was landing on March 11th instead of March 21st. The church was celebrating Easter at the wrong time. The calendar was lying to the world again. It was time for the final architect to step forward. It was time for a pope, a council, and a decision that would erase 10 days from history. Time is a game of fractions. When Julius Caesar and Sosigenes the astronomer built the Julian calendar, they believed they had solved the puzzle of the universe. They believed that the year was exactly 365 days and 6 hours long. 365.25. It is a clean number. It is a satisfying number. It fits neatly into the math of the leap year. But nature hates clean numbers. Nature does not care about our need for symmetry. The Earth does not orbit the Sun in 365.25 days. It orbits the Sun in 365.24219 days. Look at that difference. 0.00781 of a day. It is roughly 11 minutes and 14 seconds. It is the time it takes to boil a pot of water. It is the time it takes to walk a mile. It is nothing. In a single human lifetime, this error is invisible. If your calendar is 11 minutes off, you will never notice it. You will live, you will grow old, and you will die without ever realizing that the sun is slightly out of place. But civilizations live longer than humans. And the Julian calendar was running, slightly too slow. It was counting days that were just a fraction too long. Think of it like a clock that ticks just a millisecond too slowly. For the first few centuries of the Roman Empire, everything seemed fine. The calendar held. The statues of Caesar stood tall. But as the empire fell, as the marble burned and the aqueducts crumbled, the error began to grow. By the year 325 AD, the time of the Council of Nicaea, the calendar had drifted by about 3 days. The Council of Nicaea is important. It was the first great gathering of the Christian Church. They met to decide the fundamental rules of their faith. And one of the most important rules was the date of Easter. Easter is the resurrection. It is the core of the religion. And its date is tied to the sky. The rule was, Easter shall be the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. The spring equinox is the moment when day and night are equal. In the Roman calendar, this was supposed to happen on March 21st. So, the Church locked it in. March 21st is the equinox, they said. But the universe was moving. Because of the 11-minute error, the actual moment of the equinox, the physical moment the sun crossed the equator, was slipping backward. It slipped to March 20th. Then March 19th. Then March 18th. Let us move forward through the fog of the Middle Ages. The year is 1000 AD. The Dark Ages are ending. Castles are rising in France and England. The drift is now 7 days. A full week. If you were a monk in the year 1000, looking at your calendar, it said March 21st, equinox. But if you looked out the window, the equinox had happened a week ago. The Church was celebrating Easter at the wrong time. To the medieval mind, this was not just a scheduling error. This was a crisis of the soul. If you celebrate the resurrection on the wrong day, does it count? Are you praying to a God who is listening, or are you shouting into a void because you missed the appointment? Scholars began to notice. Roger Bacon, the famous friar and scientist in the 1200s, wrote a letter to the Pope. He was angry. He said the calendar had become a laughing stock. He said that unlearned men were mocking the Church because even a farmer could tell that the spring was arriving before the calendar said it should. The calendar is lying, Bacon wrote. But the Church did nothing. Why? Because fixing the calendar is dangerous. To fix it, you have to admit you were wrong. You have to admit that for centuries, the saints and the popes were praying on the wrong days. You have to admit that Caesar, the great pagan architect, made a mistake. And practically, how do you even fix it? If you change the dates, you disrupt the contracts of merchants. You disrupt the harvest. You disrupt the saints' days. So, the Church did what institutions often do. They waited. They let the drift continue. 11 minutes. 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Drop by drop, the bucket filled. We arrive now in the 16th century, the Renaissance. The world has exploded with new ideas. Michelangelo is painting the Sistine Chapel. Copernicus is suggesting that the Earth moves around the Sun. Gutenberg has printed the Bible. And the calendar is now 10 days out of sync. 10 days is a lot. 10 days is a third of a month. The drift was so bad that farmers were confused about when to plant. The Church was celebrating Easter so late that it was drifting toward summer. If they let it go on for another few thousand years, eventually Christians would be celebrating spring Easter in the middle of the snow. It could not be ignored anymore. The man who finally decided to stop the drift was Pope Gregory XIII. Gregory was not an astronomer. He was a lawyer. He was a pragmatist. He was a man of administration. He was elected Pope in 1572. He looked at the mess of the calendar and said, "Enough." He formed a commission. The Commission for the Reform of the Calendar. It sounds like a boring bureaucratic meeting. But this was a gathering of the greatest minds in Europe. They met in a villa outside Rome. They had one goal, to save time. But they had a problem. Everyone knew the Julian calendar was too long. Everyone knew about the 11 minutes. But how do you create a calendar that doesn't drift? If you just remove the leap years, the year becomes too short. If you keep the leap years, the year is too long. They needed a number that fell somewhere in between. They needed a mathematical trick. They received proposals from all over Europe. Astronomers sent in complex diagrams, giant wheels of numbers, strange new systems. Most of them were useless. Too complicated for the common people to understand. But then, a manuscript arrived from the south of Italy. It came from a quiet, unknown place. Calabria. The toe of the Italian boot. It was written by a man named Aloysius Lilius. Luigi Lilio. He was not a famous university professor. He was a doctor. A man who spent his days healing the sick and his nights staring at the stars and scratching numbers onto parchment. He had died before his work could be presented. His brother, Antonio, brought the book to the Pope. The Pope's advisors opened the book. They looked at the math, and they saw the elegance of a genius. Lilius had found the solution. He realized that the Julian leap year rule, add a day every 4 years, was the problem. It was adding too many days. Over the course of 400 years, the Julian calendar added 100 leap days. But the solar year only needed 97 leap days. There were 3 extra days every 400 years. That was the drift. That was the error. 3 days of trash time that accumulated every few centuries. So, Lilius proposed a new rule. A rule of subtraction. He said, keep the leap years. Every 4 years, add a day. That is good. But if a year ends in 2000 foot, if it is a century year, like 1700, 1800, 1900, we must stop. Normally, because these numbers are divisible by 4, they would be leap years. But under my system, they will be common years. We will skip the leap day. However, and this is the brilliant twist, if the century year is divisible by 400, like the year 1600, or the year 2000. Then we keep the leap day. Let us pause and admire this logic. 1700, divisible by 4, but not by 400. No leap day. Skip. 1800, no leap day. Skip. 1900, no leap day. Skip. 2000, divisible by 400. Leap day. By skipping 3 leap days every 400 years, Lilius shaved off the excess time. He brought the average year length down from 365.25 to 365.2425. It is almost perfect. It is accurate to within 26 seconds per year. It will take 3,000 years for this calendar to be off by a single day. It was the perfect trap for the sun. The Pope's chief astronomer, a Jesuit named Christopher Clavius, checked the math. He checked it again. He tried to find a flaw. He found none. This is it, Clavius told the Pope. The doctor from Calabria has solved it. So, the future was fixed. The mechanism for the new calendar, the Gregorian calendar, was ready. But there was still the problem of the past. Just like Julius Caesar in 46 BC, Pope Gregory faced a reality gap. The calendar was currently 10 days behind the sun. If they started the new rule tomorrow, they would stop the drift, but they would still be 10 days late. The equinox would still be on March 11th. To reset the clock, to bring the spring back to March 21st, they had to do something drastic. They had to delete time. They couldn't add days, like Caesar did. They had to subtract them. They had to cut 10 days out of history and throw them away. Imagine being told that. Imagine the Pope standing on the balcony and saying, the days between October 5th and October 14th simply will not happen. It sounds simple on paper. But think of the human cost. What if your birthday was October 9th? You wouldn't have one this year. What if your loan was due on October 10th? Do you pay it early, or do you pay it late? What if you were paid by the day? Would you lose 10 days of wages? It was a logistical nightmare. But Gregory was a man of authority. He issued a papal bull, a formal decree. It was titled Inter Gravissimas. Among the most serious things. It was signed in February 1582. The order went out to all the Catholic kingdoms of Europe, to Spain, to France, to Portugal, to Poland, to Italy. On the night of Thursday, October 4th, 1582, the Julian calendar will end. When you wake up the next morning, it will be Friday, October 15th. 10 days. Gone. Vaporized into the ether of history. It was the most audacious act of time travel ever attempted. But issuing a command, and having people obey it, are two different things. The Pope could command the priests, but he could not command the Protestants. He could not command the Eastern Orthodox Church. Europe was divided. The Reformation was in full swing. The Protestants hated the Pope. They viewed him as the Antichrist. So when the Pope said, "Change your calendar," the Protestants said, "No." They suspected a trick. They thought the Pope was trying to steal 10 days from their lives. They thought it was some kind of magical ritual to trick them into worshipping on the wrong days. And so, the world broke in half. For the next 300 years, Europe lived in two different times. If you crossed the border from Catholic France to Protestant Germany, you traveled 10 days backward in time. You could leave Paris on October 20th and arrive in Berlin on October 10th. It was chaos. Letters had to be double-dated, written on October 15th and 25th. Treaties had to be signed with 2 dates. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back to that specific night. The night where the cut happened. Rome. October 4th, 1582. The night of Thursday, October 4th, 1582, was a quiet night in Rome. The autumn air was cooling down. The Tiber River flowed sluggishly past the Castel Sant'Angelo. The candles were snuffed out in the windows of the Vatican. People went to their beds as they always did. Bakers prepared their dough for the morning. Priests said their final prayers. Children curled up under woolen blankets. They closed their eyes on the 4th of October. But when they opened them, the world had shifted beneath their feet. The sun rose as usual. The roosters crowed as usual. But the date on the calendar was not October 5th. It was Friday, October 15th. Somewhere in the silence of that sleep, 10 days had simply ceased to exist. They were gone. October 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. These days were never lived. No child was born on them. No one died on them. No contracts were signed. No bread was baked. They are ghost days. Holes in the fabric of human history. If you look for them in the archives of Italy, Spain, or Portugal, you will find nothing. Just a blank page where a week and a half of life should have been. There is a famous story about that night, a story of a saint. Teresa of Avila, the great Spanish mystic. the woman who wrote of the interior castle of the soul. She was dying. She lay in her monastery in Alba de Tormes, in Spain. Her breath was shallow. Her sisters were gathered around her bed, praying. She passed away late in the night on October 4th. But because the calendar switched at midnight, she was not buried on October 5th. She was buried on October 15th. To the people of the future, it looked as if her body had laid in state for 10 days. But in reality, it had been less than 24 hours. Even in death, she was caught in the glitch of time. For the Catholics of Europe, for Italy, Spain, Poland, and Portugal, the shock was sudden, but it was obeyed. The Pope had spoken. The drifting spring was fixed. The equinox was back on March 21st. The mechanism of the universe was aligned. But for the rest of the world, the trouble was just beginning. You have to remember the state of the world in 1582. Europe was not a union. It was a battlefield. The Protestant Reformation had torn the continent apart. Martin Luther had nailed his theses to the door. King Henry VIII had broken with Rome. To a Protestant in Germany, or an Anglican in England, the Pope was not a holy leader. He was a tyrant. He was the enemy. So, when the Pope sent out his astronomers to say, "We have fixed the math. You must delete 10 days," the Protestants did not see science. They saw a trap. They believed that the Pope was trying to manipulate the heavens. Lutheran mathematicians in Germany looked at the Gregorian calendar. They checked the math. Privately, they admitted, the Pope is right. The Julian calendar is drifting. The new system is better. But publicly, they could not agree. "We would rather disagree with the sun than agree with the Pope," one Protestant leader famously said. And so, they refused to change. They kept the old Julian calendar. They kept the drift. They kept the extra leap days. And suddenly, Europe was existing in 2 different time zones. Not separated by hours, but by days. Imagine you are a merchant in Catholic France in the year 1600. It is December 25th, Christmas Day. The bells are ringing. You are eating your feast. You decide to travel east, to Protestant Germany. You ride your horse for a few days. You cross the border. And suddenly, it is December 15th. Christmas has not happened yet. You have traveled back in time. You have to wait 10 days to celebrate Christmas all over again. It was a world of double dating. If you pick up a letter from this era, say, a letter from a diplomat in London writing to a diplomat in Paris, you will see the date written like a fraction. January 10th and 20th. March 3rd and 13th. It was the only way to be sure that the person reading the letter knew when it was written. For almost 200 years, this madness continued. The Catholic countries marched in step with the sun. The Protestant countries marched in step with their pride. But the universe does not care about pride. The universe cares about gravity. And the Julian calendar kept drifting. Remember the 11 minutes? They were still there in the Protestant countries. By the year 1700, the gap was no longer 10 days. It had grown to 11 days. The Protestants were slipping further and further away from reality. Finally, the greatest Protestant power of them all, Great Britain, could not take it anymore. Let us cross the English Channel. Let us go to London. The year is 1750. The British Empire is rising. Its ships are sailing to India, to America, to the Caribbean. But their calendar is a mess. It wasn't just the 11-day gap. The British had another problem. They didn't even agree on when the year started. In the Catholic world, the year began on January 1st. But in England, the legal year began on March 25th, Lady Day, the feast of the Annunciation. So, if you were in London on February 10th, the year was 1750. But if you were in Paris on the same day, the year was 1751. It was a nightmare for trade. It was a nightmare for history. There was a man in England named Lord Chesterfield. He was a worldly man, a diplomat. He had lived in Paris. He knew how convenient the Gregorian system was. He decided to fix it. He went to the House of Lords. He gave a speech. He didn't talk about popes. He didn't talk about religion. He talked about embarrassment. Why, he asked, should we be the laughingstock of Europe? Why should our neighbors look at us as if we cannot count? He brought with him a team of mathematicians. They drafted the Calendar Act of 1750. The King, George II, signed it. The order was given. Great Britain and all its colonies, including the future United States of America, would finally join the rest of the world. But they had to pay the debt of time. They had to delete the 11 days. The date was set for September 1752. On the evening of Wednesday, September 2nd, 1752, the people of England went to bed. When they woke up, it was Thursday, September 14th. September 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th were gone. Benjamin Franklin, who was living through this, wrote in his almanac, "Be not astonished, nor look with scorn, for the month of September, 1752, is to have only 19 days." He joked that it was pleasant for anyone who loved to sleep, for they could lie down in peace and wake up nearly a fortnight later. But not everyone had Franklin's sense of humor. There is a persistent legend, one that historians argue about to this day, that the people of England rioted. We have paintings from the era. Satirical cartoons by William Hogarth. They show crowds of angry people marching through the streets, carrying banners. And the banners say, "Give us our 11 days. It sounds absurd to us. Why would you riot over a date? But think about it. If you paid rent by the month, did you have to pay a full month's rent for only 19 days of living? If you were a worker paid by the day, did you just lose 11 days of wages? The landlords, of course, demanded the full rent. The workers, of course, felt cheated. And deep down, there was a superstitious fear. If God ordained that a man has a specific number of days on this earth, did the Parliament just shorten your life by 11 days? Did they bring your death closer? It was a moment of profound psychological dislocation. But, eventually, the riots, if there were riots, subsided. The rent disputes were settled. Britain and America were now Gregorian. George Washington, who was born on February 11th under the old calendar, changed his birthday to February 22nd. That is the date we celebrate today. He moved his life to fit the new grid. So, by the late 1700s, most of the West was united. But there was one great power that refused to change. One vast, stubborn empire that clung to the past with icy determination. Russia. The Tsars of Russia viewed the Gregorian calendar as a corruption. They were the protectors of the Orthodox faith. They would not bow to the Pope in Rome. And so, Russia stayed on the Julian calendar. They stayed on it through the 1800s. They stayed on it as the gap grew from 11 days to 12 days. They stayed on it into the 20th century, when the gap became 13 days. This led to one of the most famous timing errors in history. The year is 1908. The Olympic Games are being held in London. The Russian shooting team is one of the best in the world. They are expected to win gold. They travel across Europe. They arrive in London, ready to compete. But when they get to the stadium, it is empty. The cleaners are sweeping the stands. They ask, "When does the shooting competition begin?" The British official looks at them and says, "It began last week." It's over. The Russians had forgotten to change their calendars. They had left Russia on the Julian date, thinking they had plenty of time. But as soon as they crossed the border, they lost 13 days. They missed the Olympics because their country was living in the past. It would take a revolution to break the Russian clock. In 1917, the Bolsheviks rose up. Lenin, Trotsky, the Red Army. They overthrew the Tsar. They executed the royal family. They wanted to destroy everything about the old Russia. They wanted to destroy the religion, the class system, and the traditions. And that included the calendar. Lenin looked at the Julian calendar and saw it as a symbol of backwardness. Russia is 13 days behind the civilized world, he said. We must catch up. So, in February 1918, the Soviets issued a decree. Wednesday, January 31st, 1918, was followed immediately by Thursday, February 14th. 13 days. Vanished. It was the last great shift. The last major nation to fall in line. There were still some holdouts, of course. Greece didn't change until 1923. Turkey in 1926. China in 1929. But essentially, the world was finally synchronized. After nearly 2,000 years, from the muddy hilltops of Romulus, to the marble halls of Caesar, to the observatories of Pope Gregory, to the revolutionary streets of Moscow, humanity had finally agreed on one simple question. What day is it? But, is the calendar actually finished? Is the Gregorian system perfect? Or are there still tiny, microscopic errors ticking away in the background? Are we still drifting, even now, while you sleep? And what about the future? What happens when we leave this planet? What happens when we live on Mars, where the year is 687 days long? Will we bring our January and February with us? Or will we have to build a new architecture of time? We will explore the final stillness of the eternal clock in the last section. And so, the work is done. The architects have put down their tools. Romulus has left his hill. Numa has closed the doors of his temple. Caesar has sheathed his sword. The Pope has blown out his candle. The arguing is over. The confusion has settled. We are left with the result. Take a moment to picture the calendar that hangs in your mind. It is a grid, a perfect lattice of squares, 7 columns across, 5 rows down. It is a net that catches the days. There is a tremendous peace in this structure. We no longer have to look at the moon and wonder if the month has ended. We no longer have to wait for a priest to shout from a hilltop. We no longer have to worry that the harvest will come in the winter. The machine works. It ticks forward, silently, invisibly, reliably. Tick, tick, tick. Every 4 years, without you having to lift a finger, the month of February quietly extends its hand and catches the extra time. Every 400 years, without you needing to know, the century year adjusts itself to keep the sun in place. The 11 minutes that haunted the Romans, they are gone. Captured by the math of the Calabrian doctor, the drift is over. We are now drifting only in the way we are meant to drift, into sleep. Let us walk through this perfect year one last time, not as a history lesson, but as a sensation. Feel the cycle of the Gregorian wheel as it turns. It begins in January. The gate. The month of Janus. The air is cold. The ground is hard. The world is reset. It is a time of stillness. 31 days of quiet potential. Then, the wheel turns to February. The short month. The ancient month of purification. The days lengthen just a little. The light changes from grey to pale blue. 28 days. A brief breath. Then, March. The old new year. The waking up. The frost melts. The mud appears. The green shoots push through the soil. The equinox arrives on the 21st, locked in place forever. April. The opening. The rain. The smell of wet earth and new flowers. The softness of the air. May. The growth. The fullness. The warmth of the sun on your skin. June. The solstice. The longest day. The sun stands still high in the sky, refusing to set. July. The month of Caesar. The heat. The hum of insects. The slow, lazy afternoons. August. The month of the emperor. The gold of the wheat. The dryness of the grass. The feeling of the year ripening. September. The turning point. The air gets crisp. The shadows get long. The harvest is gathered. October. The falling leaves. The wood smoke. The preparation for the dark. November. The 9. The frost returns. The rain falls. The world goes inside. December. The 10. The end of the circle. The shortest day. The long night. The fire is lit again. And then, silence. And then, January returns. Round and round it goes. A circle that has no beginning and no end. A circle that holds us. It is a cradle. You do not need to count the days anymore. The days count themselves. You do not need to worry about time. Time has been solved. There is nothing left for you to do but to let go. To let yourself float on this river of time. Imagine yourself as a leaf on that river. You are floating past the days, floating past the weeks, floating past the years. There is no rush. There is no destination. There is just the gentle movement of the current. The Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, the solar cycle, the lunar cycle. They are all just names for the same thing. The heartbeat of the universe. And your heart beats in time with it. Slow, steady, rhythmic. Narrator speaks very slowly now, with long pauses between words. The past is a memory. The future is a dream. There is only now. This quiet moment. This safe place. This dark room. The calendar on the wall is watching over you. The stars outside are watching over you. The logic of the centuries is holding the world together so you can rest. Sleep now. The architects are sleeping. The emperors are sleeping. The astronomers are sleeping. The sun has set. The moon has risen. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sleep.